Hi folks, how are you? I'm Phil Mullen and I'm talking about three aspects of my community music practice. So the three aspects I'm talking about are what I call skeletal structures, and then reflection in action, which is of course well known, but I'll be focusing on a particular thing I call dynamic reciprocity within that. And then the third area I'm going to look at is accepting and working with what the children bring. Now, these are not the only areas of my practice, or not the only areas of what I call community music pedagogy, with pedagogy being a somewhat contested word. But I think they're kind of interesting. I think they're kind of interesting to get into. Before we do get into them, I'm going to give a little bit of background and context about where I'm doing this work, etc., so it kind of clarifies a couple of things for you. So I do my work in England, where there's a very strong community music community, as I'm sure you may well be aware of. And I am working mostly in either mainstream school settings, where I'm bringing in community music approaches. I call them inclusive music education approaches, to be frank. But I'm either working in mainstream school settings to try to counterbalance the approaches that are currently there to bring in a more inclusive approach, or else I'm working in what are known in England as PRUs, or pupil referral units. These are units for kids who can't be in school, very often, but not always, because of their behaviour, because they have difficulties accepting the rules of school, and they kind of tend to chafe against those, as it were. So they're the context I'm in. So very specifically, these things are about those contexts. I'm going to start with the skeletal structures approach. And what does that mean, and where did that come from? For me, it always used to bug me when I'd be working with formal, music teachers or other teachers or whatever. They'd say, well, the thing about you community musician people is you've no structure. And I was like, hang on, we have a structure, I just don't know what it is. And it used to just drive me crazy, and that's why I kind of got into this whole idea of looking at what is the structure and why is the structure. And I think skeletal structures, I kind of came up with the terminology and kind of identified some of that stuff really in opposition to, and I am in opposition to what people called outcomes-based education, or objectives-based education. The idea, as I understand it, that teachers will go into classes with lesson plans which says what the kids will do in terms of music, exactly what they'll do in terms of music, and at the end they'll say, all the kids will do this, some of the kids will do that, a few kids will do that, maybe one kid will do this. And they kind of know in advance what the kids are going to do musically. Well, I don't know. As a community musician, I want to not know what's going to happen in the session, because I want the session to be creative, and create things I've never heard before. Yeah. Also complicating it is not just not knowing and not wanting to know what the outcomes will be in advance. But I also am working, as all community musicians are that I know, I'm working with not just developing and working towards musical outcomes, but also personal outcomes and social outcomes with the participants all at the same time. So that's a kind of musical, personal, social outcomes intertwined into a virtuous circle. That's such a central thing in community music. So when I'm doing all of that, and I'm also, there's a lot of alsos, isn't it? When I'm doing all that, I'm also after some kind of shift in insight or awareness amongst the participants, or some shift in a sense of their efficacy within the creative process. So it's hard to say exactly when those shifts are going to occur. I don't know when they're going to occur, so I can't really plan a session in that formal way. What can I do? Yeah, what I can do is I can work to create an environment that's based on safety for all the participants, meaning that they feel that they won't be laughed at, etc., etc. They're safe, and they feel safer to offer their own expressions, their own creativity, because we've set that environment up. Yeah, we've used skeletal structures, which I'm going to come to more and more, to set up that safe environment. We've set up an environment that is value-based. Yeah, and those values lean towards some form of equality, or at least some form of what John Rawls would have called applied fairness. Yeah, so we're looking at applied fairness, and we're also I'm trying to create an environment that is creative, that allows for creativity. So I put these skeletal structures in place. In other words, I'm kind of creating a room. I'm creating a room with the kids, and I do that by a number of things. Firstly, I would have routines and signposting. Now, I'd have routines and signposting because that will alleviate anxieties of certain kids. Kids with generalized anxiety disorder, children on the autistic spectrum, for example, would appreciate signposting routines. I'll also do a session to develop a group contract, yeah, or ways of working together. Some people call this ground rules, yeah. But I will work with the kids and they will come up with ways they wanted to be treated, etc. in the session. And that really creates a group that creates safety amongst the individuals in the group, but it also creates a group as well. So that's kind of got a double thing going on in it. I'll work on shared ownership, which I'm going to come to later in this film, but that's, you know, helping individual empowerment for all the young people, hopefully, because they're getting some ownership. But also it's breaking the myths of position power. My role as a leader is trying to move away from the old established norms as much as possible. I'll try to semi-democratize, semi-democratize this space. So I'll lay the chairs out in a particular way. I'm never going to have the kids in rows. It's just so, I don't remember if I've ever had to do that. It's just not what I would do. So we try and create a space where everybody has the appearance of an equal voice. A lot more could be said about that. And that helps, changing the space around just in itself helps create a sense of newness for the young people, yeah? And it helps encourage contributions from different places. Nobody's sitting at the back. I'll create spaces for feedback throughout the program. And those spaces, that feedback, and of course feedback in group work comes from Kurt Lewin way back, I don't know, possibly in the 30s or 40s of the 20th century. But allowing feedback gives people space to express their feelings, which I think is crucially important in an arts project. And it can become an invitation for them to co-construct what's going to happen going forward. Yeah. Some more things that I would do. I would welcome all contributions all the time. I make a big thing of welcoming contributions. I think that's very important in making people feel safe to contribute. Yeah. I would suggest different combinations of working groups so we're not all stuck in the big circle all the time. Some trios, some small groups, etc. Some pairs work, for example. Certainly something. I'd ask the group for guidance on how to move forward or what to do next, yeah, rather than just say, here's what we're going to do. I'd offer support rather than tell people what to do. You know, in the main, generally speaking, obviously in some situations you're in flow, you say, let's do this, let's do that sometimes. But generally you're trying to support. And I would very much articulate as a leader, remember I'm working in units where people are excluded from school because of their behaviour. So as a leader, I very much try to articulate a non-coercive approach. I allow people to exit the room, re-enter the group without any sanction, without any comment. It's great, you're welcome, let's come in and let's do this. So a whole range of things that I'm doing there as skeletal structures. If I may say one more, sometimes I'll create what we call a positive timeout space. So there's a space in the room that's designated as where people can go if they're feeling a bit stressed or whatever. So that's a structural thing to me, as are all the others that I mentioned so far. So what am I trying to do with the skeletal structure approach? I'm trying to create an immersive and safe creative environment. Yeah, I'm trying to develop group democracy and group respect for every individual to every other individual. I'm trying to promote individual engagement, yeah, through the seating, through all the things I've said, and feelings of being included. I'm trying to start this sharing ownership process, which I'll come on to more as we go into this film. But I'm also trying to encourage different peer interactions. Yeah, so there's not a kid over here doesn't get to interact with a kid over there. Yeah, and we'll come back to reflection later in this film. But I'm trying to use reflection as a tool for musical improvement. So that's really what I want to say about the whole skeletal structure thing. It's a different way of looking at structure where we have goals, we know our goals, we know our intentions. We're not trying to get it all immediately. It's not within this session, this will happen. It's within this session, we will create situations, environments where some creative and interesting things can happen, where some personal change could happen, where some group or social change could also occur. So the second section in this film is going to be about reflection in action, which is a well-known term, and also I'm going to include this strange little term, dynamic reciprocity, which is related to that. Reflection in action, very well defined by David Schoen and other people, of course, as I'm sure you'll know. I'm going to do a lot of reading in this section, because I'm going to read from my forthcoming book and also some stuff from my previous PhD studies as well. I'm going to quote from some people who I interviewed as well. So reflection in action, reflection during action, is being able to think about what you're doing while you're doing it. Yeah, it could be described as thinking on your feet. As simple as that. It happens in practice without any stopping or interrupting of that practice, according to Rhys, Jones, Marks, Moran and Rose. Marks, Moran and Rose describe reflection in action as a spiral process that reshapes the action while it's happening. So you're doing stuff, you're thinking about what you're doing, you're finding meaning you're analysing the meaning of what's going on, and then you change what you do in relation to that. A really quite kind of interesting thing. So the written plan, very, very secondary if relevant at all. It's really feeding off what's happening in the room. Now that in my working in exclusion units, could be influenced by a number of things. So firstly, I will need to have a broad awareness of the current situation within the session. I kind of need to know what's going on. I need to read the room. Yeah, that will mean I'll have to have a feel for where the group is at musically, and where the room seems, we'll call it affectively, emotionally in a sense, and also what is the current group dynamic and energy. Really important stuff that I would need to know. I would need to be aware of. I would need to be reading before I have any confidence in terms of my actions. I would need to have some understanding in the kind of the context that I work in of the various potential pathways that have brought the individuals and the group to that point in the session. What's their kind of journeys? I at least have some empathy or sense of what that might mean for them, their journeys to that point. I need to have a judgment for the potential for individual and group development across musical, personal and social areas. I keep returning to that because it's central. And I also need to have a good knowledge of my own intentions, for the session and for the overall program, and the values that dictate those intentions. So I've spent a lot of time on my intentions because I need to, because the people I'm working with are quite vulnerable. So I need to know why I'm doing what I'm doing. I also need to have some degree, and this is something I work on a lot, I'm not great at it, but I work on a lot, some degree of self-awareness in terms of my kind of positionality and my biases. So I need to have some sense of that, so I'm at least aware of them and often countering bias within myself. And I need to have a sense of issues in the context, in the specific context, that relate to power and inequality. So then again, obviously informed there by the writings of Michel Foucault in relation to that, and Clarissa Hayward and others. Just reading from my future book here. Bleakley from 1999 says that spontaneous reflection is a hands-on business. It's rooted in the immediacy and the heat of practice. So that immediately implies to me is you're probably going to get it wrong a lot of times, and I certainly do, and I think we all do. Make those decisions the wrong way, make those interpretations the wrong way. It's as Bleakley says, in the sticky moments of indecision, feeding on sudden shifts in circumstance, forcing improvisations and forcing risk. And you got to, that's community music in practice. We're in the middle of that, not fully knowing, not fully sure, but still making decisions as we go, but reflecting all the time on those decisions. And Zeichner and Liston talk about 5 different levels at which reflection can take place. And I think the first two are going to be the ones we'll come back to. But they talk about rapid reflection, so immediate, ongoing, and automatic action by the leader. So it's very rapid, just split-second decision. Then they talk about review, which is where, sorry, no, not review, my fault. They talk about repair, in which a thoughtful leader makes decisions to alter their behaviour in response to participants' cues. Yeah, so that's the kind of most interesting bit for me. You see something going on, you interpret something going on, and you change what you were intending to do because you make some kind of judgment about what this might mean, where this could go. Repair, very interesting. Review is when a teacher or leader thinks about, discusses, or write about some element of their work. So that'll be reflection after action, really. As would research, when the leader engages in more systematic and sustained thinking over time. And then following from the research, re-theorizing or reformulating, the process by which a leader critically examines their own practice and their theories in the light of academic theories, also frankly in the light of lived experience. Now, really the interesting ones for me are those first two. That immediate response, and then the repair response, the response where you're kind of thinking at a deeper level. So in the heat of a situation where I'm working, what might seem rapid and therefore immediate and automatic might indeed be immediate, but it is informed by thought processes forged over considerable time that, very importantly for me, align with humanistic values. Yeah. In other words, it's quite close to repair. It's quite close to the repair thing all the time. I ran a number of focus groups for my PhD, and I'd quite like to quote from one here, which I think is really interesting. One community musician said, "The thing is, if everything is set in stone, you stick to your plan and wouldn't do anything else, it wouldn't work. The session would just not work." Yeah. And they say they don't necessarily set in stone in mainstream schools either, because they think there's some questioning coming from children. Yeah, but they want to go in a really good creative direction that the children are actually asking me, this person, because I want to learn something and the kids are really interested. So yeah, let's just go with it. We won't forget what was going to plan. We can bring that up at a later stage, according to that community musician. So working with the kids in the moment brings up this question of what I call dynamic reciprocity. Now, it's a strange phrase, and it comes, believe it or not, from wound repair management. So in wound repair management, you've got a wound, you've got a cut, yeah? And you've got skin either side of the cut. And weirdly, the cells on one side, when they start to heal, it kind of kicks off or sets in motion the cells on the other side who kind of heal in response to that, and then the other side comes back and heals in response again. So it becomes this dynamic reciprocity between two sides of a wound. And I just thought, wow, I just thought that would be a really interesting thing to see if that phrase fitted with the thing that I'm talking about, and I think it does. And what's the thing I'm talking about? I believe there's a responsibility. This is all about sparking things off. It's all about sparking things off, yeah? So I believe there's a responsibility for the leader within their communication to, most of the time, there are exceptions, yeah? But most of the time, drive towards goals. Most of the time, drive towards positive, well, I'll even call it worthwhile musical group work. Yeah? We're driving towards worthwhile, positive musical group work. I don't think we're neutral as leaders. I think we have a responsibility to the group to make it a good experience for them, in the sense that we are addressing musical development, personal development, and social development. So we have to nurture the group, and we have to also try to achieve the task, as quoting from David Jacks there on that. So in all of that responsibility means that I would take in communication from the group. That could be a look, that could be a phrase, I don't know what it's going, but whatever's coming from them, I'm going to take it in and kind of transform it. I'm going to kind of transform the signals that they send me into positive signals that I'll send back. This dynamic reciprocity thing. Yeah, they've sent me something, I'm sending them something back that's a little bit more healed, or a little bit more well, or a little bit more positive, if you take my point. Yeah? And then they'll send something back to me again, and I'll do the same again. And hopefully, we'll all start building the group until it becomes a real high-performance group. That's my idea. about dynamic reciprocity. Questions that I had asked myself is, hang on, are you just controlling the group then? I thought you were supposed to be a facilitator. Very interesting question, and I've trailed it here for people to think and talk about that. The question of control in the group, the question of influence of the leader, I've spoken about on previous occasions. Are we stopping the group's growth by this kind of Pollyanna-ish approach, positive approach? Interesting question. Should we be more neutral? I don't think I can be neutral personally, but it's a good theoretical philosophical point. A couple of quotes that I think I'd like to share with you in this from other community musicians, music leaders. One is this lovely quote here. It could well be, they're talking about how they respond, how they reflect in the moment and respond. It could well be the inclusion of a particular child that maybe has not engaged before. They suddenly do something. It might just be a noise, and then you might say, wow, that's a great noise. Let's go with that noise. Yeah. So you do something around that, and you say to the others, can you do a noise to match that? And it all just takes off from there. So that to me is a really good example of what I call dynamic reciprocity. I'm going to give you one more quote to close this section. And this does talk about that short, immediate response and the longer response, you know. It's kind of a nice one. And this is from Beth, a wonderful community musician from the north of England. So she says, yeah, going with the child and keeping your eye on the whole group. So you're going with the individual child, you're keeping your eye on the whole group. So your eye is always on the big picture. And even though this particular child never takes part, I haven't taken my eye off him for 1 second. And the minute he flickers, I enable whatever he is offering to become part of what we've got. Even if he's just itching to take control or anything. But at the same time, I'm thinking, is this a wise decision for the group then? Or am I just feeling sorry for that poor child who's not been involved in the session? I think on two levels all the time. One is about quick reflex, and I always think about the bigger picture, the longer picture. Obviously in that she's talking about the child as a he, because she was working in all male context in that particular situation. So the final kind of idea or concept that I'm going to look at here is this thing of accepting and working with what the participants bring. Now I'm particularly going to relate that to my context of working with children who've been excluded from school because of their behaviour. But it's that idea of accepting and working with what the participants bring. So I said that, as well as working in those exclusion units, I work a lot in mainstream education. And I suppose I have this kind of thing going on, if I'm honest about it, which is trying to change mainstream education. Because mainstream education is kind of based, I suppose, on curriculum. Well, it's not, actually. It's based on assessment. It's based on exams. If you pass the exam, you're doing well, and if you don't, you're not doing so well. Yeah. So that kind of thing is going on. And of course, to pass the exam, we have to know kind of roughly what's going to be in the exam. So they develop curricula to pass the exam, and then they have a pedagogy to teach that particular curriculum. So the three cornerstones of mainstream pedagogy, and I'm kind of against them all in a way, particularly curricula, because I think some person who's not there, doesn't know the context, doesn't know the lives of these people that I'm working with, what have they got to really say about what these people should be doing and develop it in terms of the music? Actually, where it should come from in terms of the children I'm working with is from the children themselves. So I believe very strongly when I say accepting and working with what the children bring, one part of that is to see the children as the curriculum. Yeah, they bring the curriculum. Now I'm going to do some quotes in this session, in this last bit, again from my forthcoming book, and this is from the book rather than the PhD, but really lovely quotes. So here's one community musician saying the project they run, the project is the young people. It's not that the young people bring anything. I talk about working what they bring. It's not that they bring anything. They are the project. Yeah, the whole project is based on what these young people want. It's based on what they need. So without the young people, there's no project. Without their contribution to it. So so that's the idea when I talk about them as the curriculum. So what would be, what do they want to write about? How do they want to play? Where do they want to take it in terms of the creative expression? Most of the time, that's how I would see it. Nothing is 100%. But most of the time, the stuff's coming from them. It could be, in the case of the kids I'm working with, songs about their pets. Songs about, it could be songs, a lot of songs, could be songs about the things that they would find magical, a magic power they would like, because that's a kind of empowering thing. Yeah. So that's one of the things that they bring that we kind of accept and work with. The next one's kind of hard to talk about. It's like that they bring what I'm going to call for now non-mainstream ways of being and communicating. So I believe that in the mainstream education, there is still the concept of a norm. There is still societal protocols, if I put it that way. You're supposed to sit down when the teacher's talking, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff, which you're familiar with. And I think most of the kids I work with just can't deal with that. It just doesn't work for them. They just have to be different. And I think that difference should be celebrated. We should accept it. We should work with it. But unfortunately, in mainstream education, often, not always, but often it is rejected, and they feel rejected and excluded because they are different. So that's what I'm kind of talking, is trying to accept that difference. Some of those differences might be purely about the individual's approach to life, how they see things, but some of them may be the result of medical conditions, things that could be diagnosed. Some of them may be the result of family circumstances. Some of them may be the result of other outside events that affect that participant. So again, a quote from Pete here, the well-known Pete Moser, I can say it, he won't mind. He says, in any of these situations, they bring their energy, themselves, their desire to contribute, but somehow we all do want to be part of the world, but they bring that often in a very, very raw sense, and I think he's absolutely right. I was talking to a music teacher when I was doing my studies, and she said this interesting thing about this group of excluded kids. She said, whether you agree with this or not, here's the quote. What makes them distinct as a group is that they either look odd, or they have odd patterns of behaviour, or they are neglected as a group. They are curious. The head of school is trying to get them to look physically better than they do. So this is the idea of a societal norm. In their case, it's a positive, pragmatic decision because they will be bullied less, for example. Trying to get them to look physically better than they do because this counts hugely against them. Mostly they're desperately lacking in self-awareness and confidence. In some respects, they act overconfident. They don't fit into groups. They don't fit into their social networks at all well. So the type of kids I work with. So accepting that and working with that, and not trying to crush or quash that is absolutely important. The third thing in terms of working with what the young people bring is working with, they bring their place within the group. Weirdly in groups, and anybody who studies group dynamics will know all about this stuff. But weirdly in groups we have kind of roles. Some people will be the bullied person, the scapegoat in the group, and they'll bring that from group to group to group. Yeah, strange kind of thing. Some people will be the leader in most groups they go into. Some will be the challenger in most groups they go into. Really, really interesting. So they bring their place within the group, and I do a lot of work on that. I do a lot of work on trying to enable people to move from one place to another and to have a range of different roles which they can choose from and which they can adopt. So that's very important for me. The fourth of 5 things that I identify that the kids bring is this idea that they bring hurt. Yeah, and they bring the outcomes of neglect. I'm just gonna quickly look at a quote here, which it's from a very close colleague. It says they bring their difficult behaviour and all the hurt and neglect that leads to it. Yeah, it's a lovely quote. So what do you do with that? How does the leader respond to that? I think one thing you have to do is interrogate your positionality. As a leader, you are different from the people you're working with. This is the thing, and you need to kind of work out what that difference is, what that means to you, what that means to them, and how you negotiate that and interrogate that across the whole program that you're doing. I think as a leader, you need to be consistent so that there's some level of trustworthiness that you project to the group. Without that, the thing's too unstable if you're working with people in extreme situations. And I think you need to constantly, in any group, work on the relationship between you and the individuals, you and the group. Now, when we say relationships, we kind of get a little afraid of that and think, oh, there's a safeguarding issue. We mustn't be warm. I'm not talking about that. Obviously, you must be professional. You must be on top of safeguarding. But you do need to be warm with these kids. You do need to look for more openness from yourself and from them if it's appropriate. I think continually working on the relationship. The last and final thing in this film, and I do say film because I'm from Ireland, yeah, is around what the young people bring or what the participants bring, and accepting that and working with that, is humour. The young people I work with, they bring humour. They actually bring cheeky humour a lot of the time. And in school they would get slapped down for that sometimes. I really don't want that to happen. I want us to celebrate that humour. They bring love, and again, as I say, we can use the word love in education, and it's not a problem as long as we're aware of safeguarding, etc. But they do bring that warm emotions, and they bring childishness. And sometimes that childishness is hidden. Yeah, and they bring this kind of hidden childishness, and it can come out. And I like to encourage that. I like to encourage people to express themselves in silly ways and do silly things. The last thing I'm going to say about all this stuff about what people bring is just this lovely comment about a young person and the energy that they brought to the rap writing, writing of raps. And here's the quote. A young person missed his session because he had to spend the night in the prison cells. In the session next week, he was full of energy because he spent the time in the cell writing lyrics, which he then recorded. His direct quote was, "I'm sorry I wasn't here last week, but it's all right because I wrote a rap when I was in my cell." So that's a fantastic little quote about, the young person being their own curriculum and all of that kind of stuff. Thanks for listening to me. That's been very interesting for me to put this together, and I hope some of it, a little bit at least, is of some use to some of you. Thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it a lot. All the best. Bye.